Right, Georgia, we're looking at I want to kind of juxtapose the two absurdities. One is Joe Manchin and the other is Mitch McConnell. And they're having a particular conversation that I think should be concerning to anyone who is concerned about our environment whatsoever. Senator Joe Manchin was at a hearing on energy prices, and he wanted to make sure that everyone knows the following, that he said, quote, "I can tell you the coal market in West Virginia has never been hotter." Meanwhile, Mitch McConnell is accusing Democrats of a holy war, saying that they have a plan to build back Beijing in a very xenophobic fashion. But I want to unpack the substance of it, because underneath it, it is a push to move us further away from doing what we need to do on the environment. Let's take a look at this clip from Joe Manchin.
And I can tell you, the coal market in West Virginia has never been hotter. They cannot produce enough coal for the demand in the world. U.S. coal exports in the second quarter of this year jumped to 20.6 million tons, a more than 50% increase from the same time frame last year.
American families don't want Washington politicians waging a holy war on fossil fuels in the first place. They can't afford that nonsense. But it's even more absurd that Democrats' top-down schemes would just increase China's wealth and dominance all along the way. They don't have some smart master plan to invest in Americans' future. They've got a plan to build back Beijing.
So notwithstanding the xenophobic nature of the last sentence, right, what we have here, Georgia, is a conversation that's happening between the most powerful Republican in the country, which is Mitch McConnell, and arguably the most powerful Democrat in the country, because we just came through an entire season of Joe Manchin controlling the entire conversation around the infrastructure debate and voting rights. That said, here's the conversation that's being had. You have the leading Democrat saying coal is the way to go. It's the best thing happening in West Virginia. And you have the Republican leader saying the Democrats are waging war on fossil fuels. We are moving our country further and further away from the necessary conversation about renewable energies and about taking care of our environment. And our two top political parties in this country are not only oblivious, they are engaging in conversations that are going to intentionally sabotage our ability to do something to preserve our environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like we are getting closer and closer to this fork in the road. Do you want to make money, or do you want to have an earth to live on? And until people really start understanding, and when I say people, I'm talking about the political leaders who are arguing over basically the lesser of two evils, right? Until they start to prioritize the earth instead of money, we're going to continue to see the disasters that we've seen with the wildfires, with the flooding, with all of these different environmental issues, the oil spills. We're destroying our earth. And we've talked so much on the show about how the wealthy probably don't care because they have enough money to go live on Mars, But for those of us who don't, we need to not only think about the renewable energies and stop thinking about the profitability, but we also need to, I think, speak to our indigenous brothers and sisters about the way in which they were preserving the earth. And there are some practices, even recently I learned about controlled burning that was happening that would actually help mitigate those outbreaks of the wildfires we would see. And so the fact that that has been outlawed, the government went through and outlawed indigenous people from being able to do that. And that's why we see these huge wildfires, because no one's going through every so often and burning the land in a good way that helps cultivate the soil in the land for growth, and so that it's not dry, right? But the government wants to control it all as though it knows best, and it just feels like we're headed nowhere fast.
Yeah, and here's the punchline, right? The government controlling it all at the benefit and for the benefit of major corporations. You think of all of the different industries that have a stranglehold on our entire political structure. It would be easier for us to perhaps get to Mars than it would be for us to break away from the energy industry. These major corporations that have a stranglehold on every aspect of our, so much so that they're able to take journalists and imprison them. I'm referring to a story that we'll unpack at another time, but the kind of grip that these corporations have, it's not only on our political system, but it's drenching now into complete and utter control over our destiny as it pertains to this earth. For us to go back and do things properly, we really have to consider the nature of the people who control all the levers of power. And I see it manifested mostly in people like Joe Manchin and Mitch McConnell.
It'd be interesting too to dissect campaign dollars and see what energy companies are funding which politicians. Because a lot of times we know that influences the issues that these political leaders advocate on.
Absolutely. It's the most obvious and legal form of bribery. And it is the biggest joke that our American politicians are for sale. The highest bidder, who can give the most money. And right now, it's not the people. The people, we don't have the resources to buy politicians the way ExxonMobil does.
Yeah. And even looking at manufacturers, the companies that make cars, we have the technology to have 100% electric cars. But will the manufacturers make the switch when it's cheaper to continue producing cars that run the same way that they've always ran, right? And so to make a huge industry shift like that, it's going to cost somebody, right? And so nobody wants to foot the bill. And so I feel like there's also a bit of hot potato that's being played. Everybody's trying to pass the buck to the next person, because at the end of the day, we know what's right for the environment, but somebody's got to pay a cost in order to shift these industries so that they're in a line with renewable energies. And nobody wants to bite the bullet. Nobody wants it to affect their bottom line. They want somebody else to lead on it. They want somebody else to pave the way for them. That's right. And so there's also things that could be done, though, in terms of tax write-offs. I don't know if you remember when Obama was in office, there was this push to get, all these older cars off the road. Yeah. And
cash for clunkers.
You got a tax incentive if you traded in your car, or, but it helped also, just even for optics, all of these rust buckets, right? That probably were extremely terrible for the earth, right? It not only was for optics, it was also for the environment. But now we're in this place where people can't afford the cars that are better for the earth. Yeah. And so how can we do a big push to get people to either, be able to afford it or get a write-off or something? There's got to be something.
So I'm reminded it's a different category of the conversation. I know we're talking about the environment, but I'm thinking about on economic policy. There are volumes of books, and one in particular, I'm thinking about John Rawls' Theory of Justice. We know what to do. We know how to resolve issues like poverty. We also know how to resolve issues like what we're doing on the environment. Here's the gag, Georgia, with the cash for clunkers, that became the biggest weapon in the arsenal of the Republican Party for their political fodder. And this is what they do. They will take all of the best ideas and they water it down to something that becomes milquetoast, something that's ineffective, something like this watered down infrastructure bill, something like Joe Manchin is there to make sure that we don't actually get enough progress. Why? Because like you said, Georgia, we need to look at all of the private industry, all of the coal companies, all the fossil fuel industry companies that are pouring money into his campaign, as well as that of Republicans.
And what does that mean for them? Because when there is a push to switch things over and advance the industry and change consumption, some of those
That's right.
businesses are going to go out of business.
And that's why they're buying themselves time. See, this is applicable in every industry. I'm thinking now of the marijuana industry and the tobacco industry. These private companies are using the government to slow down the process long enough so that these major corporations can get the advantage in the industries. And it's the same thing there, Georgia, when we talk about this transition, because we're going to have to eventually get there, or else we are going to destroy ourselves. Now, I want to put one quick caveat here. I think we need to really have a conversation about the fact that some of the people in this conversation are okay with us destroying ourselves. While you and I are now kind of talking about the nuance of how we can get some policy implemented, we look at the conversation between Mitch McConnell and Joe Manchin, and they're talking about how we can get even more oil, how we can use even more coal. So we are dealing with some sociopaths that I think are willing to pass that hot potato that you mentioned. They're willing to pass the hot potato of the last generation to the next generation. They're betting on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think a part of this conversation too, and you start thinking about like those renewable energies in different ways to preserve the earth, like we purchased a building, we have solar panels on the roof of it. We don't even know how to use it. And so I think the other side of the coin here is changing consumption and building awareness for the average consumers, everyday people, because some of these tools and resources are at our fingertips. Some of them we can afford. And there's ways that collectively we can work together. Like right now, we're not occupying that space, but those solar panels could still be producing energy that's stored in, I think, like some kind of a battery that then that energy can be distributed to other people or other buildings, right?
Georgia,
and so
I know a guy.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I'm saying I know a guy, because you're right, that we could get that connected. Holler at me after the show. We get that, because those small steps, those are things that I think we can begin to enrich our community. You're absolutely right. It has to be top down and bottom up. And we as individuals do have that individual responsibility, and those individual responsible actions can form a greater collective action.
Yeah. And there's so many empty lots. You could start to fill some of them with solar panels. And when you also look at single parent homes or people who are in poverty, right? How much would it help them to have a free electricity bill? Right. So, I mean, there's so many different things that we could be doing, but at the top, yes, it does start there because they're leading on this issue, and the decisions that they make ultimately will affect consumers. But we have to have better awareness and knowledge on how to utilize the resources that are already at our fingertips.
That's right. That's right.